Open Google Maps and zoom into the United States. We assume that if a town is worth knowing, someone would have told us by now. That assumption is wrong. Some of the most compelling places in America didn't stay hidden by accident. They were left behind when the money moved on, buried under new maps, or, in a few cases on this list, deliberately kept out of the story that everyone else was handed. These aren't ghost towns. Most still have mayors, zip codes, people who wake up every morning and call them home. They're just invisible. Today, we're going to 10 of them, ranked from the ones that were simply forgotten all the way to the ones where someone needed them to stay quiet. By the time we get to number 1, you'll understand why that distinction matters. Mentone, Texas. The least populated county seat in America, and the government is still open. Drive 4 hours from Dallas, past every town that ever had a reason to exist. Turn down a road that doesn't show up on most GPS systems. You found Mentone, Texas. Population, approximately 19 people. Not 1,900, 19. Mentone is the county seat of Loving County, the least populated county in the continental United States. No grocery store, no bank, no school. The nearest hospital is 50 miles away. But there is a courthouse, a county judge, a functioning government, still open, still operating for 19 people. This is the story of oil. The Permian Basin made Loving County briefly, spectacularly valuable. Workers came, money flowed, and then the money decided it didn't need Mentone to do what it was doing. It moved to Midland, to Odessa, anywhere with a stoplight. The government never left. The people who stayed never left. They just kept governing 19 people in a courthouse that once served thousands. MATFIELD Green, Kansas. The math stopped working, and the town never recovered. There's a particular kind of silence on the Great Plains that tourists mistake for peace. It is not peace. MATFIELD Green sits in the Flint Hills of Kansas, one of the last intact tallgrass prairie systems in North America. Breathtaking, about 57 residents. And it has been losing people for nearly a century without anyone in a major city noticing. The spacing of plains towns wasn't random. It was calculated how far a farmer could travel by horse and return in a single day. Every 8 miles, a town, a grain elevator, a general store, a school. Then came the car. Then consolidation. 1 grain elevator didn't need to become 5. The logic that built these towns evaporated, and the towns followed. The young left first, not because they wanted to, because staying meant inheriting a system that no longer had use for them. The old stayed, because leaving means admitting the place you built your life around had already decided to leave you first. MATFIELD Green isn't dying. It's been dying slowly for 70 years, and that, somehow, is worse. Thurmond, West Virginia. Once the wealthiest railroad town in Appalachia. Now 5 people live inside a national park. At its peak, more freight tonnage moved through Thurmond than through Cincinnati. Hotels were full, cash changed hands around the clock. One bank reportedly held more deposits than the bank in Charleston. Thurmond sat at the narrowest point of the New River Gorge, the place every train on the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway had to pass through. For a while, that geography was enough to build a whole town around. Then the coal seams thinned. Routes changed. The Depression arrived, as if Thurmond needed one more complication. Today, 5 permanent residents remain. The depot still stands, immaculate and empty, frozen at approximately 1930. The National Park Service maintains all of it, not as a town, but as a monument to what a town used to be. 5 people live inside a national park. They have the New River Gorge as their backyard. They have no neighbors, no services, no reason to stay except the deepest, most stubborn kind of loyalty to a place the rest of the world has reclassified as scenery. The National Park Service preserves Thurmond not as a town, but as a warning. Tularosa, New Mexico. 800,000 people drive past it every year. Almost none of them stop. Every year, roughly 800,000 people visit White Sands National Park. They drive south on Highway 54, turn into the park, take their photos, and drive back out. 10 miles up that same highway, they pass through Tularosa without stopping. Tularosa is one of the oldest continuously inhabited communities in New Mexico. Its acequia irrigation system, still functioning, was built in 1863, designed from Spanish colonial techniques that predate American statehood by generations. Authentic architecture, a living agricultural identity, real festivals that were never designed for outsiders. Part of the answer is geographic. The White Sands Missile Range surrounds much of the Tularosa Basin, cutting off natural development corridors for decades. Hotels and restaurants migrated toward Alamogordo. Tularosa became the town you pass on the way to somewhere else. Here's the irony. The algorithm's indifference kept it intact. No one came to renovate it for tourists. Nothing was staged. What you see is what was actually built. Tularosa has everything a destination needs, except anyone pointing at it on the map. CAHABA, Alabama. Alabama's first state capital. Now it floods every spring and the state prefers not to discuss it. In 1820, CAHABA became the first permanent capital of the newly admitted state of Alabama. It sat at the confluence of two rivers, prime position for trade and transportation. The legislature met here. The governor's mansion stood here. Then the rivers flooded, and then they flooded again. The capital moved to Tuscaloosa in 1826, then to Montgomery in 1846. Each time, CAHABA stayed behind, a little smaller, a little less relevant. By the end of the Civil War, CAHABA housed one of the Confederacy's most overcrowded prisoner of war camps. Union soldiers died there in numbers that were never properly counted. Today, CAHABA is a nature preserve. The ruins are visible above the waterline during dry seasons, brick foundations, the ghost of a street grid. There are no interpretive signs at the ruins of the governor's mansion, no markers for the prison camp dead. Alabama had its first capital for 6 years. It has spent the subsequent 2 centuries acting like it didn't. CAHABA didn't fall from power. It was simply inconvenient, and inconvenient things get moved off the map. RENTIESVILLE, Oklahoma. One of America's last surviving black townships, structurally erased from the map that was handed to everyone else. After Reconstruction ended, thousands of black Americans faced an impossible calculation: stay and navigate a system explicitly designed to disenfranchise and extract from them, or go somewhere new. In Indian Territory, what would become Oklahoma, a different possibility emerged. Dozens of all-black townships were founded: Boley, Langston, Clearview, Taft, places where black Americans could own land, govern themselves, build institutions, and exist outside the direct reach of what was being built around them. Rentiesville was founded in 1903. It survived the era of the Tulsa Race Massacre, 1921, when the Greenwood District, known as Black Wall Street, was burned to the ground. Rentiesville was smaller, quieter, less visible. It survived by being overlooked. Today, roughly 100 residents remain. The Down Home Blues Club, one of the most authentic blues venues in the American South, operates here, in a town that has never once been designed for outsiders. Real music, real history, a living cultural institution that mainstream travel journalism has never once pointed a camera at. That invisibility was not accidental, it was structural. These communities were never given the infrastructure, roads, tourism, investment, federal attention that would have put them on the map handed to everyone else. Rentiesville was never put on the map that was handed to everyone else, and 40 years of travel journalism never thought to ask why. Scotia, California. The last company town in California until the company decided it was done. In most of America, the company town is a historical artifact, something from the Gilded Age, something that ended. Scotia operated as a genuine company town until 2008. The Pacific Lumber Company, PALCO, owned every house, every business, the church. Employees paid rent to the company and lived inside a physical geography PALCO controlled entirely. In exchange, extraordinary job security and a forestry operation that was, by its era's standards, sustainable. Then came Charles Hurwitz. In 1986, his company Maxam executed a leveraged buyout of PALCO, financed with junk bonds. To service the debt, Maxam began clear-cutting old-growth redwood at a pace the forest couldn't sustain. Protests followed. The Headwaters Forest Campaign became one of the defining environmental battles of the 1990s. PALCO went bankrupt in 2007. The company sold the Scotia properties in 2008. The subsidized housing, the guaranteed employment, the cradle-to-grave certainty, gone in a single transaction. The redwoods that were supposed to anchor Scotia's economy for generations were already gone too. Scotia didn't lose its identity. It had its identity extracted, board by board, tree by tree. Hanksville, Utah. Some towns feel isolated. Hanksville feels separated from the rest of the country entirely. It sits in southeastern Utah, surrounded by desert, rock formations, and hundreds of miles of open land that look almost untouched. The landscape is stunning. But it also makes one thing very clear. This is not a place people arrive at by accident. Hanksville exists because a few highways happened to cross here. That's the reason the town survived. Gas stations, small motels, a handful of buildings keeping travelers moving through terrain that feels closer to Mars than to most of America. In fact, NASA has tested Mars simulation programs not far from here for exactly that reason. And once you see the landscape, it makes sense. There are long stretches outside town where it feels like civilization simply stops. You could live here. Some people do, and genuinely love it. But most Americans would struggle with the isolation almost immediately. Because Hanksville isn't hidden by history or industry. It's hidden by geography itself. Libby, Montana. The company knew for 30 years. The town didn't find out until people started dying. Libby, Montana is a small logging and mining town of about 2,700 people in the far northwest corner of the state, Narrow Valley. Mountains that look, in every photograph, like exactly the kind of place you'd want to live. For decades, the W.R. Grace Company mined vermiculite in those mountains. What Grace also knew, and documented internally as early as the 1950s, was that the Libby vermiculite was laced with a particularly lethal form of asbestos called tremolite. They suppressed it. Workers brought tremolite dust home on their clothes. Wives laundered those clothes. Children played on piles of vermiculite tailings that had been donated to the town, used as fill for the high school running track, for driveways, for gardens. The whole community breathed it for a generation. The EPA declared Libby a public health emergency in 2009, the first time that designation had ever been applied in American history. Over 400 people had died. More than 3,000 had been affected by asbestos-related disease. The cleanup has already cost hundreds of millions of dollars and is still ongoing. W.R. Grace filed for bankruptcy in 2001. Several executives were prosecuted. All were acquitted. This is why Libby is number one. Every other town on this list was forgotten, bypassed, engineered, or sealed. Libby was silenced, and the silence had a body count. Libby, Montana wasn't forgotten, it was silenced. And silence, it turned out, had a body count. GILMAN, Colorado. You can see it from the highway. You cannot go inside. No one has lived there since 1984. There is no sign explaining why. Every ski season, somewhere between 4 and 5 million people drive I-70 through the Eagle River Canyon between Denver and Vail. They all pass GILMAN. Almost none of them know its name. Perched on a cliff above the river, GILMAN looks from the highway like it could be a resort. The buildings are still standing. Houses, what appears to be a school, a church. Intact, weathered, quietly spectacular against the canyon walls. It is sealed, fenced, inaccessible, an EPA Superfund site. New Jersey Zinc Company built GILMAN as a company town in the early 20th century. Lead and zinc came out of those mountains in enormous quantities. The waste, heavy metals, acid mine drainage went directly into the Eagle River and the surrounding soil. When contamination became impossible to ignore, the company evacuated the town in 1984 and locked the gates. No cleanup, no demolition, no acknowledgement on any roadside sign. The buildings have been deteriorating for 40 years, watched by every driver who glances up at the canyon wall and keeps driving. There is no historical marker on I-70. The state would prefer you arrive at your ski resort on time and not ask questions about what's on that cliff. GILMAN is the only town in America that's completely invisible, despite being in plain sight of 5 million people a year. These towns aren't hard to reach. Most have roads. Some still have governments. People still wake up there every morning. But somewhere along the way, attention moved on. Some were left behind when the economy changed. Some were passed over until nobody noticed them anymore. And a few stayed hidden because someone benefited from keeping them that way. The question isn't why these towns are hidden. The question is why so few people ever stop to look. Which of these surprised you most? Let me know in the comments. And if you know a hidden town that belongs on this list, tell me below. The next video might already be there.